Morning, everybody. This morning we're going to look at that passage. I put the growing seed there because although the passage is about two different seeds, the point of the seed is the same. And it's quite interesting towards the end of that passage, Jesus was saying that he preached in parables, but then he went away and he explained to the disciples everything. And I suppose in many ways that's the purpose of the sermon this morning, to explain what is behind the parable itself, or the two parables. Next slide, please. Now, Chris actually preached the passage slightly out of order so they could get the parable of the sower in for harvest. You probably remember that harvest was a couple of weeks ago, and it was the famous passage where Jesus talked about seed being scattered and it going on to 4 different types of soil. And he was explaining what those particular types of soil did to the seed. And it was really a pen sketch of what happens when God speaks his word to people and how they respond. This particular passage then continues on without a break. Next slide, please. And I'm going to start looking at the parable of the growing seed. Now, the two parables, the growing seed and the mustard seed, they're together. But as I read them, they're really about two different things. The first one is about us as individuals and how we respond to the seed. And the second passage seems to be more related to the church, although they're interconnected, because of course the seed is that little bit of the faith that's within us that will grow and grow and grow. So the man starts off by growing the seed. If you're a big Monty Don fan, in our house, Monty Don is Friday night, and Friday night is Monty Don. You will see how that person is very, very carefully putting the seed in place in the ground so that it will grow. Sometimes you scatter seeds, but in this particular case, it's being very carefully placed at intervals. So what happens to the seed? Day and night, the seed grows. It starts off within the ground, and slowly but surely, it starts its passage up through the earth. As soon as it sees daylight, it then becomes a stalk, and then it becomes the head. And then finally, the sower puts a sickle to it. Now, that's obviously an old picture, because if you're a big country fowl fan, you'll know that Adam, who's a farmer, has huge fields on his ground, and he has these massive combine harvesters worth hundreds of thousands of pounds that work almost through the night, he was saying on the last program, to gather in all the seed. So it's come to the end of its life, it's served its useful purpose, it's grown, and now it can be harvested. And the harvest then goes off, goes into barns. So let's just see how this applies to us. Next slide, please, John. First bullet point. The faith we have as Christians is the seed. That's very important. The faith we have as Christians is the seed. We got that seed almost planted within us when we first heard about the gospel and responded. We listened. We weren't like the other 3 grounds in the parable of the sower that completely rejected the seed. We allowed that seed to grow within us, and it started to grow and grow and grow and grow. And that's as it should be. It's very important that our faith isn't static. It doesn't matter how young or how old we are. We have to see that seed growing within us. Next slide, John. But how does it grow? Now, left to me, I have to say the whole of the earth would be barren. I am not a gardener. I have no real feel for gardening. My expertise in gardening at home is laying flags, concrete, chippings, and that's it. tarmac even, that now the rest of my family are good on gardening. I am not allowed to prune because I get that wrong. But I do know that for the seed to grow, it needs nutrition. In seed terms, it's fertilizer, it's rain, it's warmth, and it's light. And all of those are the things that are necessary for that seed to grow. But what about our faith? What do we need to make our faith grow? Well, I'm sure that if you've been listening over the years, you'll have heard what I'm about to say rehearsed many times by the people who are standing at the front of church. But they're still absolutely vital, because if, when it comes to growing seeds, you miss any of those things I've said, if there's no water, and that's caused huge problems for farmers. If there's no warmth and light, the seed doesn't grow. There's no fertilizer in the soil, that the seed then withers and perishes. And that's true for us. We need the nutrition that God has given us. We get it through our fellow Christians encouraging us. We get it through reading our Bibles. We get it through perhaps being part of a group, and we talk together about the faith that we have. And it's very interesting. You've ever sort of read books by people who are Christians and who have been left alone by themselves. They find it very, very hard to maintain their faith, and they're so grateful to be able to go back and worship with other people and meet with other people. There are some people who like what they call the solitary life, but that solitary life still includes prayer, and it includes reading their Bible. They're absolutely essential that we have those things. Why is that the case? Next slide, please, John. That's lovely. Because what will be, just go back, what will be our end game? I was said a few minutes ago about the man in the picture. I couldn't find any picture of both men and women scything fields, but that man was scything that field. He was cutting his grain down, ready to harvest. I've talked about the combine harvest, but the idea that Jesus was saying here is that our faith grows and grows and grows, and then there will come the harvest. Now, the harvest means what to Christians? It means essentially that we move on from this earth and we're harvested to become part of God's kingdom in heaven. Can somebody just get me a glass of water, please? I'd really be grateful. We need to be part of that kingdom that is in heaven, and Jesus will call the harvest in. It's a very powerful symbol in the Old Testament, and it comes out by the things that Jesus said in the New Testament. Our end game doesn't end with this life, it ends with our life in heaven. So let's have a look at our next picture, the other seed, the mustard seed. Now, according to all the books, the mustard seed is the smallest of all the seeds. It is a tiny seed, but it grows. Next slide, please, John. Not quite sure. And then the one again. John's left it. Oh, thank you, Derek. That there. That is a common picture we have of what mustard plants look like when they're fully grown. Or alternatively, this is the next slide. If you read the passage, it talks about birds being able to rest in the branches and things like that. Well, I don't think in the conventional bushes that would be true. So I had to find out what was going on in this passage. And when you look back, it would appear there are some tree-like things that were at the time of Jesus that he was probably alluding to when he showed that it started off as this little tiny seed, and then it went to something that was big, and it was something that grew and grew and grew. And this is what Jesus is talking about in this passage, the growth In the first passage about the growth of us as individuals, as Christians, in this case, it's the growth of the church. Next slide. These are estimates. So the next first figure is, this is the one I can guarantee. It's not the only one I can really guarantee. Acts 1 to 1:15, there were 120 believers. So that's really the very, very, very early church. There were 150 believers. By AD 100, it was supposedly, according to this American Bible textbook, 10,000 believers. 200 that had gone up again to 20,000, 200,000. AD 250, 1 million people. When you get to the 300s, it would grow even more because the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity legitimate. And the Christian church then grew quite considerably as a result of his actions. And then finally they reckon about 80,600 million. And then according to the latest, about 2.4 billion people across the whole of the world profess to be Christians. Now, all of those figures, apart from the first one, are estimates. They didn't have censuses in that time. They were just estimates from various sources. Now, at least currently, we do have a reasonable figure about what it means. But again, you've got some issues about, well, when people say they're Christians, what does that mean? But that's the kind of figure. And that shows how Jesus was showing to everybody of his time that the Christianity would start off as small, and it would grow, and it would grow, and it would grow, and it would grow. Now, to the people of the time of Jesus, that would be an unusual thing to say, because he was growing up and working within a Jewish community. And the Jewish people essentially are a group that stay within themselves. They don't go out to evangelize like we do. And they must have been wondering why it was that the church was going to grow when they hadn't seen that growth. They only knew the growth coming from their own people expanding. But Jesus was saying no. Why was he saying no? Well, the answer was because, of course, he was moving on to seeing a world where the Gentiles, the non-Jews, will be coming into the church, and that will be the growth area. Some Jews would remain within the Christian church, but in the main, they would stay within their own faith. But the growth would now be people who weren't Christians. Next slide, please, John. A church has grown in the way that Jesus promised. That was his promise, that the church would grow and grow and grow. Next slide. What is our contribution? The church needs people to make a contribution, to make the whole thing work, to have the resources available to allow us to continue growing and growing and growing. Now, that little thing there about it's the AGM next week, that's just to kind of remind people, but it is a sign of what we need, the fact that people have to volunteer, they have to be able to do things, they don't necessarily have to be able to stand at the front or lead or whatever. The very important jobs need to get done as well. And it's often the little, what people consider unimportant jobs are the things that do need to get done. But we all have to make our contribution. And our contribution will change on how our faith grows and develops. And it will also change with our personal circumstances, our age, our family commitments, what other responsibilities we have. But we always need to be sensitive to the way that God is gently pushing us forward to take on different responsibilities, not necessarily bigger responsibilities, but different responsibilities, so his church can be effective. And my final slide is in the passage, verse 32, yet when planted it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants, with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade. That is a picture of the church with birds perched in its shade. In other words, it's offering refuge, it's offering protection for those bears. And what are we doing to ensure that in the world around us, we're making our contribution to protect people, to help people? Now, we're very fortunate here because we have the work of CAP, we're involved with Tear Fund, we're involved in missionaries, we have people who help with the food bank, and we've had also street pastors going out. So we are making our contribution to ensure the church is something that will look after people. And that's vitally important, because when the church becomes a nice little talking shop and they just want to talk about things, the church will wither. The only thing that makes it grow is an outward concern for other people. So where does that leave us? Well, I think the answer is it leaves us thinking about us. What's happened to the seed in our life that God planted when we became Christians? Is it kind of undernourished? Does it look all withered and shrunken because we haven't been nourishing it? Do we give it the right sort of nourishment in terms of Bible reading and prayer, but also gaining new experiences so that our faith can grow and develop? Now, for each one of us based in church here and out there on Zoom, your answer to that question will be different. But it does give you the opportunity, when we look at this passage, to evaluate yourselves. It's very common if you work in industry or commerce that you have an appraisal. There was a situation, because I was involved in a few different things, I was appraised 4 times in 1 week. And it can seem a bit of an overkill, that doesn't really matter. But at least it gave me the opportunity to think about how well I was doing. Sometimes people describe this process of holding a mirror up so you can look at yourself and you can make some judgments about how things are going. I'm going to pause for a minute, and I'd like you to hold that mirror up in front of your face and think about what I've been saying. Just for a few minutes. We'll now close with prayer. Lord, you have examined us, and you know what we're like in the depths of our hearts and our being. Help us to be honest with you about where we stand in our relationship with you, and help us also to think about how well we're nourishing not just our physical bodies, but our spirits. And this we ask in your name. Amen.